How can the New York Jets pivot now that Odell Beckham Jr. is with the Baltimore Ravens?
Inside, and a beauty! Hall running free! Brees Hall inside the 10! He's gonna score!
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to Talking Jets with Tigo. My name is Tigo, and today we're going to be talking about the wide receiver room. Yeah, you heard me, right? We all know, obviously, that the Baltimore Ravens have signed Odell Beckham Jr. to their team, giving him a top 10 wide receiver contract in the NFL, massively overpaying him, but getting him to go be their number one wide receiver. It's a smart move for the Baltimore Ravens, not necessarily because of the money. They're in a position where they have to overpay to get wide receivers, but for the same reason that the New York Jets were in on OBJ was one of the big reasons why the Baltimore Ravens were in on OBJ, and that's the premier pass catcher rule, and I'll get into that in a second. But I was arguing in a group chat with a couple of other content creators, and I was arguing the fact that losing out on Odell wasn't that big of a deal, and I got shut up almost immediately by two different, one guy just regularly on Twitter, and then by Buffalo Jet fan in the group chat, which is one of the reasons why I'm making this video. And he said, you don't win Super Bowls by stopping at what you need. And this is an absolutely fantastic quote. It absolutely shut me up, and it really got me thinking, because he's absolutely right. You don't win Super Bowls by stopping at what you need. You win Super Bowls by going out and getting luxuries at positions that you're already strong at, making things that are strengths into superpowers. And that's what Odell was going to do. He was going to come in and be another premier pass catcher for this football team, because we really only have one in Garrett Wilson. And so I started looking at the NFL, and I started trying to come up with a way for the New York Jets to maybe pivot and get another premier pass catcher. And unfortunately, there's none left in free agency. When you look at the free agency pool, you got guys like Kenny Golladay, Julio Jones, Randall Cobb, Jarvis Landry. Like, these are not premier pass catchers. Who are these guys? These are guys that used to be premier pass catchers, who are aging, who are old, who are injured, and are on the last legs of their career, if not past that. And so if the New York Jets want to acquire another premier pass catcher, they have to do it through trade with another team. And there are a couple of teams out there. Now, why do I keep using this premier pass catcher phrase? Well, I saw a tweet, and I wish I would have saved it, and I didn't, that said, if you look at, it's by Buffalo Jet fan, actually. If you look at all of the teams that have had recent success in the NFL, they all had two premier pass catchers. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs when they had Kelsey and Hill. Look at the Baltimore, the Cincinnati Bengals with Chase and Higgins, the Bucks with Evans and Godwin, the Rams with Kupp and OBJ, the 49ers with Debo and Kittle and Ayuk and McCaffrey. Look at the Eagles with Brown and Smith. They all have two premier pass catchers, and that's where they have their success. And the New York Jets don't. And if you look at teams that don't have the two premier pass catchers who are making the playoffs and aren't having the success, you see very similar things. Look at the Baltimore Ravens. All they had was Mark Andrews. Look at the Buffalo Bills. All they have is Stephon Diggs. And so, yes, the New York Jets were in no position to pay what the Baltimore Ravens paid, but we can still go out and get a premier pass catcher. Who are the guys that might be available for a trade, and who can we go out and get that would be a premier pass catcher for this football team? Well, there are a couple of names. I think the first thing that we have to remember is that a couple of the names that I'm going to be bringing up are guys that we haven't heard any rumors on. We haven't heard anything. Well, a couple of guys we have. But remember that every year we get a surprise trade for a player that we didn't hear any information on. A.J. Brown last year, we knew about that one, but Hollywood Brown the year before that. Players get traded at the draft and after the draft to accommodate certain teams and certain situations. So let's start with a guy that I don't think is going to get moved, but maybe this team is kind of not ran really well, and they might be in a selling mode to try to accumulate as many assets to get younger, cheaper guys, and that's Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. He's got 2 years left on his contract, and he would come in as a $15 million cap hit. Makes a ton of sense when you look at that side of things and the expectation there for him. So again, do I think he's going to get moved? Probably not, but it is a name to keep an eye on. Now, the rest of these guys are guys that I think there's a legitimate shot for them getting moved. And I think the biggest name on this list is going to be Cooper Kupp, the wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. His contract would be excellent for the team trading for him. He'd be essentially a $15 million cap hit for the next 3 years, which would just be fantastic when you look at the breakdown of his contract and all that stuff. He's definitely a premier pass catcher. He was on the list that I mentioned earlier, and the LA Rams are in a position where they might be looking at trading the sun, the moon, every player that they have that's worth to restart and re-get assets and start building through the draft again. They have been in F them picks mode for a long time. They finally won a Super Bowl. It might be time to get into the opposite and start selling off assets to kickstart your rebuild is the word that I'm going to use. So keep an eye out, because if Cooper Kupp becomes available, the New York Jets should be interested in. The next two guys we've talked about on this channel before, and that's both Broncos wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton. It seems inevitable that one of those guys might end up outside of the Denver Broncos organization. And if that's the case and that ultimately ends up happening, the New York Jets should be interested. Now, these both are guys with question marks to their games, but with a premier quarterback, which none of them have had in Denver since they've been there, premier play calling and all those things, like, there might be an opportunity to do that. They're familiar with the scheme already with Nathaniel Hackett and all of those things. So, hey, it makes sense. Jerry Jeudy is on the final year of his rookie deal, and Courtland Sutton has 2 more years left on his deal, so it makes a ton of sense if you wanted to trade for either one of those guys. The next guys are also teammates for an NFC team in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Again, a team that should be instigating and starting a rebuild. Like, this should be their motivation. They should be trying to get as many assets as possible. They went out and won a Super Bowl, and Mike Evans is on the last year of his deal. Chris Godwin is signed to the last year of he's got 2 more years left on his deal. Go and get assets for guys that aren't going to be on this team when you're trying to win again. And so Chris Godwin and Mike Evans might both become available, because I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are trying to compete for the number 1 pick in next year's draft. They want to go out and get Drake May or Caleb Williams or whoever it is. And Mike Evans and Chris Godwin aren't going to be here when your new core is going to be competing to win. So they might become available. And then my favorite name of the list, a guy that we know is available that might actually get cut, is DeAndre Hopkins. And I would be all in on DeAndre Hopkins. A little bit of a hot take, probably not a hot take at this point, but I was actually a much bigger fan of DeAndre Hopkins than I was of Odell Beckham Jr. I was more interested in trading for DeAndre Hopkins because I think that it would look something like the Brandon Cooks trade, like a 6th or a 7th round pick would get the deal done, and you can get DeAndre Hopkins, and according to Over the Cap, you could negotiate that contract down to like a $6 million cap hit this year and like a $9 million cap hit next year with 3 void years, and not have to carry a massive amount of like dead cap in those 3 void years on the back end when the salary cap is set to explode. Like, there are ways to make it work, but if he hits free agency, I would be all in on going and getting DeAndre Hopkins, giving him a 2-year deal and doing that. Statistically, over the last 3 seasons, he's been better than Odell Beckham Jr. He's been more recently the best wide receiver in football. And I think outside of the concern of like the PED test that he failed and all of that stuff, I think DeAndre Hopkins still has the potential and the ability to be that elite wide receiver that we saw. He just, unfortunately, is in Arizona. And so those are all of the guys that I think that the New York Jets could target in the wide receiver room. Let me know, is there anyone that I missed from any of the teams? I tried to legitimately look at teams to see who they were willing to trade and who I would consider to be a premier pass catcher. Let me know in the comment section below. And last but not least, go Jets.